North Carolina, what it do? It's your boy Greg E. Hill, the culture change agent, and I'm excited to introduce this season's version of Advance Notice, powered by Advance Carolina. Advance Notice is the one-stop shop for Black programming in regards to politics, economic justice, utilities, all that was going on the back end, stuff you don't see in North Carolina that affects Black people. So if you want to get educated, involved, and empowered about what's going on as a Black or Black adjacent person, make sure you tune in. Welcome to the first edition of the Advance Notice Show, and I'm excited to be here. I'm your host, Greg E. Hill, the culture change agent, and like I said, this is the first edition of 2022, and we got a superstar. I know I'm putting all the hype, but we're going to address some real things that are going down in North Carolina. Before we jump in the show, I want to encourage you, excite everyone, that this year Advance Notice is going to bring you cutting-edge issues from real people that are doing the work, real stories of people that are actually in the work, and we just, most importantly, want to enlighten everyone on what's really going on, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And on that note, I want to introduce our guest and unpack her story, and most importantly, talk about the housing, utilities, and all that in North Carolina. So on that note, welcome Yolanda Taylor to the Advance Notice Show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be in this space. I'm so excited to talk about these important issues that are impacting our communities. And I love educating our communities around these social issues.
So let's jump into it. Who is Yolanda? And by the way, this is powered by the Advance Carolina. Go ahead.
Who's Yolanda? Okay, well, I wear many hats, just like I'm sure you do too, Greg. I'm Yolanda. I'm a mother. I'm a writer. I'm a professor of law. I'm a community lawyer. Yes, and I am a activist. I'm an advocate. And a health worker too, because a lot of these issues that we're going to talk about, they impact health. They're social determinants of health. So I like to refer to myself as a health worker as well. But if you want to talk about my former role, former role is that I am the program attorney of Advance Carolina, and I support a lot of important spaces around the areas of housing, health, and economic justice.
And on that note, unpack what does that mean? Because I know many of you may be used to Advance Carolina, but probably a lot of people have never heard of Advance Carolina. And then when you say you're the program attorney, can you kind of unpack that and walk us through what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, Advance Carolina is a 501c4 organization, correct? And it's about building the political capacity of communities around issues that directly impact them. And as the program attorney for Advance Carolina, what I do is I bring that lawyer lens, I bring that policy lens, I bring that experience with working with community groups who have been impacted by some of these social legal issues is what I like to call them, because they're legal, but they're also social, like housing, like, food insecurity, like, environmental justice, like redistricting, all of that work. So I'm in these various spaces supporting the good work of people like you, Greg, and my other colleagues at Advance Carolina who are actually trying to build the advocacy and amplify some of these important issues.
And on that note, right? Because the deep people, they're going to catch all that. The undeep people, they're like, oh, it sounds deep. But now it's the time to jump in the pool. What is a story about why you chose to do this work? Because you're a very smart individual. You can be doing a lot more things. Because it's tough work. And you got 2 kids. It's draining work. Some of the stories we're about to share is stuff that, I be on calls about to cry. Because it's like some real stuff going on. So why do you even do this work?
Yeah, every day, that's a question that I ask myself because, more so to motivate me, right, to stay in the game. Because when you look at the issues that impact us, Black and brown people and, and low wealth people and people who live in communities that are experiencing poverty or vulnerabilities, it seems so complex, right? And it's easy to just concentrate on your own problems, your own crises. But I'll say if I have to really think about it, Greg, I have to go back to my childhood. And I think it's not about necessarily how I grew up, because I grew up in a family that was safe, that was nurturing, that had love. So it's not about how I grew up, it's about where I grew up. It's about the communities that I lived in, the places where my parents planted their roots. It started in rural South Carolina, corn stalks, tobacco fields, but when I moved to North Carolina, a small town in eastern North Carolina called Wilson, North Carolina, I began to really understand what racial housing segregation was. Like, I didn't understand it that well as a child, but what I knew was that, well, my community doesn't have a grocery store or a real grocery store, or why is there this like truck industry like right across the street from my house, but if I go across town, I don't see these type of industries, in those communities. It just didn't seem right that I had to sit on my front porch and hear these loud sounds, of a trucking industry right across the street. Like, who allowed that to be planted in my community? And also, I knew there were a lot of people that needed transportation, and the buses were not really running to me like they should to pick them up, to take them to their jobs. So it was about like where I live, and then I connected that childhood experience with then later becoming a lawyer, and then going back to my hometown of Wilson, North Carolina, and then being able to see it with adult eyes. And I always wonder like why my friends would call this recreation center across town the White Wreck. I thought that was the name of it. I was like, oh, I'm going to the White Wreck today. But no, they meant that, that was where, white people were only allowed to go. And then, black people had their own recreational center in the black community. So like where I live kind of like awoken me to that. And going back as an adult, someone who had gone off to law school and coming back and driving through the streets I used to play in and the communities, I just saw poverty. But what I really saw were the children, of the adults who were experiencing poverty, the children like just sitting outside on their doorsteps, could be because maybe the utilities were cut off, because I'm talking about hot summer days and people are just sitting outside. And then, it just moved me. I'm a spiritual person. It moved me like, God, like poverty, and I just felt like I was supposed to play a role in ameliorating it somehow. And I'm just like, but this is too big for one person. But just being, at Advanced Carolina, working with you and others, I just see it takes many hands to do this work and to lift this work. So I will say my childhood.
I love that. And before we unpack because how we want to scope this podcast, when we talk about economic injustice as far as housing utility, we want to talk about last year first. Then we're going to talk about currently what we're fighting. And then we're going to talk about how you, the viewer, can help, right? So we want to take you through those layers. But I do want to unpack, because I was listening to your story, empathy kept running in my head. Because you're college-educated, attorney, all the people in here attended school, etc. And a lot of times we don't think about buses, systems, and how they run the timing. We don't think about necessarily a lot of times rent and like food instability. Right? I mean, for many of you that's actually watching, you're probably at a house with YouTube, you have the internet, you have an active phone. So we don't think about those things. So I want to, what would you say for those adults now that maybe they're impacted financially, but not where they have to ride the bus, not where they have to struggle, or I don't have a food line within 10 miles or Harris Teeter, or when I go there, there's no fresh produce. And people are saying, eat fresh, and don't have that. How can we build that empathy muscle as a black community to realize that, hey, these struggles that we hear about the buses, about housing, about power, they're affecting us as well. And it's not like, because a lot of us, we're not aware. So how can we build that empathy muscle?
Yeah, I think, the way we can build it is we have to just show people how it, like you said, how it impacts them. And I will say this pandemic has unearthed so many inequities. Let's start with essential workers.
Let's go.
When you stay in a hotel, middle black class person, I mean, you want the services that you want. You want your bed to be made.
Especially with COVID, you want it aired. You want a new pillow.
You want a new pillow. You want all of that. Well, let me tell you, essential workers like hotel workers were at the front lines of this pandemic. Parents, you want to be able to go to your job early and work your 8 hours without having to necessarily transport your kids to school. Well, we have bus drivers that transport our kids to school, some of us, who have been on strike recently, in Wake County, because of their low wages, and that they have been placed, again, at the front line of this pandemic. We began to hear the term essential workers. We may not have known what that term meant before, but during the pandemic, we realized that there were certain workers that were essential to keeping the economy going. And so that affects you. If you want to keep your job, if you want to keep, living as much of a normal life as you want, take your trips, you know.
Yeah. We know our hemisphere, you go on Instagram, people taking trips. They go in a hotel, they're at the hookah lounges, they're at Whole Foods. But I didn't realize until we were in the pandemic, like, remember when we were shelter in place for all those months? We went to the grocery store. We were working at the grocery store.
Every day we went to the grocery store. Well, not every day. It depends on if you know how to shop. We went to the grocery store almost every week because that was the first time some of us have ever bought that much groceries, right? And when you think about it, the cashier, you know, they kept the economy going. I don't remember one time when the cashier stopped working or when the person that picked up your trash stopped working, sanitary guys. So we have people who are important to an economy in order to keep an economy healthy and sustainable. Right now, in this COVID economy, and even before, these are low-wage workers who were struggling. They were struggling to just meet ordinary needs, you know, and so this impacts us. You know, this impacts us. If we want to continue to live the lives that we're living, this impacts us. And as African American people, we all probably have someone in our family, you know, that may not have gone to college, that may not have attained, you know, the level of success that we have, uncle, brother, sister, what have you. We have people in our family that have struggled. And it's not necessarily because of someone's individual responsibility or blame. These things are structural and they're systemic. And it's a system that was created and designed to do what it's doing, which is to reproduce inequities. So when I talk about inequities, I'm not talking about equality. We know about the concept of equality. King and other civil rights leaders fought for equality because they felt like equal was sameness. Well, we're realizing that you can't have equality until you have equity. Equity is access. So people that live in a community that's a concentrated area of poverty, that was done by design. Local cities and municipalities, they create these zoning laws. So it's not, like I say, like done by coincidence that you have an area where it's just predominantly Black, Hispanic, or Asian, or that it's poor. It's because it's been zoned that way. And that's what I realized about my community. That my community was zoned in such a way where a industrial truck industry could be built right across the street from my house. Where a liquor store could be around the corner. Where there were no grocery stores. You know, they weren't allowing that access in my community where people probably could not easily jump on a transportation bus system in order to access their jobs that, you know, if you live in a rural area, it may not be in that town. It may be in the town over, or it may be in the Triangle or Raleigh or Durham. That, you know, people who don't have access to quality education or schools, access to healthy foods, access to transportation to go to their jobs, access to affordable childcare, all of these things work to keep this person trapped, you know, in this lower income bracket of society. And these things work invisibly. It's not to your everyday eye, but I forgot to say that I also was a legal aid attorney for 13 years. And my clients were these clients who were experiencing some of these economic barriers.
And then, without saying names, could you kind of share us a story that you remember from your time on legal aid that really like gives you that boost some days when you're like, man, I got 2 kids. I got my own life. This ain't it. This is a lot of work. Too much work for me right now. Can you kind of share me a story with them days where you like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I'm cool. Share us a story that kind of keeps you motivated. Like, yo, I am necessary for this work.
So can I share 2?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, one in which I think, you know, like you said, people who may not be necessarily experiencing poverty can relate to this. Like in 2007, when the foreclosure crisis happened.
Okay.
And everyone, middle class people alike, everyone was losing their homes to foreclosure. You know, to me, that was just so stressful because I felt like I was the only one that could save the person's home. And when I think about a person's home, you know, that's their dignity, that's their security, you know, to me, it was a lot of stress. It was so stressful, Greg. You know, I had to go see a doctor. I mean, true talk. I had to go see a doctor because I was internalizing the stress of saving people's homes. You know, it was like putting out fire after fire after fire. And then when you look at foreclosure, sometimes in cities like Detroit, you know, people who have lower home values are often paying more in taxes.
Yeah.
So you have inflated tax rates to usually Black, lower income people who are then foreclosed upon. You know, when you lose your home, that is a form of wealth. So that case right there, and just having a client having to talk to them about this. And they weren't just losing it to banks, they were losing it to HOAs. Homeowners associations were foreclosing on people's homes too doing that.
HOA can do that?
HOA in North Carolina can put a claim on your home for unpaid HOA assessments and dues and then go to court and foreclose.
Wow.
So some people, I represent a client that was doing that. But I would say that one that really, really touched me was a client that was trying to recover from addiction, drug addiction, and she needed disability benefits. But, the way the laws were set up, like you can't still be using drugs and get like disability benefits. So,
which is kind of weird because it's like you're trying to recover and it's not going to be cold turkey. They tell you it's not going to be cold turkey, but while you're using or you're trying to wane, you can't get, it's beyond me.
Yeah, and it was alcohol. And I remember driving her to her hearing, and I could tell she was trying to be clean that morning, and it was starting to like get worse because right after the hearing, she had to go in the bathroom. She became sick because she had determined that she was going to be sober for this hearing, right? But she was looking for a house, right? And there was no house in an opportunity area where there were no drugs. So they're going to take someone who's recovering from drugs or trying to recover from drugs and just put her in the middle of a drug, paradise, so to speak, lack of a better words. So I'm like, how is she going to be able to retain her recovery, because she's being discriminated against as far as like housing. Wow. So that stuck with me for a long time, just knowing that I had a client that was being set up for failure.
So let's recap last year, right? So as we know, we thought in, I believe, 2020, okay, COVID is going to come and go. It came and it's still here, right? 2021 is still here. And I think one big thing, we want to focus on is, because you do a lot of work in eviction, moratorium. And a lot of people, before the pandemic, eviction is think of, you're not being responsible with your bills. It's a lot of stuff to it. So can you unpack some of the work you did last year to give the viewers a context of the underpinnings in especially rural places and in Durham and Raleigh where rent was hard to come by? A lot of stuff was going on. So tell me about the work that you did with Advanced Carolina in regards to the crisis last year and this year.
Well, yeah, I will say the work that I did with Advanced Carolina was to support particularly this space called the Statewide Housing Network space. And early on in March of 2020, when, the governor of North Carolina just shut down the whole state, we knew, other people may not have known this, but we knew that you can't just shut down this state and tell everyone to stay home when you have some people who were homeless or some people who were on verge of homelessness. So, this space is led by award-winning activist Breeding Some Bass, and I support that space and the people who collaborate there. So all of us, who were collaborating around this issue early on said, we need to have a virtual press conference. So we had a virtual press conference where we invited, local reporters to come, and we talked about this campaign, Need a Home to Stay at Home. Because how can you stay at home when you don't have a home? And we also wrote policy letters to the governor and to the lead person at the North Carolina Department of Health and Humanities and Social Services. That was Mandy Cohen. Just talking about this intersection between housing and health, and how especially the COVID pandemic unearthed inequities that were already there, as we all have come to know. But, the people that were struggling before the pandemic, those struggles were exacerbated by the pandemic. And so we wanted to make sure that people would not be evicted during this time. So that campaign, Need a Home to Stay at Home, also advocated for an eviction moratorium.
Okay, yep.
And then soon after that, and I would like to think that it was the work of that press conference, amplifying that issue, making other people aware of the fact that, you can't just look at this like, okay, we don't want people gathering. We also need to look at this that we don't want people on the streets either. We already know that, when you're homeless, you're more susceptible to illnesses, but you definitely are going to be more susceptible to COVID, but you also could possibly spread COVID if you're not sheltering in place. And with that came utilities too. So we advocated that in order to really have a home, you need utilities, because what if you're diabetic and you have medicines? You need to be able to put this medicine in the refrigerator and keep it refrigerated. So, and you're not really living in a home if you can't cut on your heater system, your AC system or, or your lights. And then during that time, a lot of kids were learning from school. So kids needed technology and they needed electricity. So that was just a huge springboard into advocating, more fully that housing is a human right. And these people needed that dignity and that protection during the COVID pandemic.
So if you could highlight from just your last year's work, what were some of the major successes that you in Advanced Carolina or anything? And then what were some of the major challenges or roadblocks that existed then and still exist today as you fight forward?
Okay. Well, the success was that advocacy needed home to stay at home. It garnered the attention of the governor. We even had some meetings with the governor regarding that. But we also were able to, I feel, because of the advocacy in the press release, push the governor to then do a shutdown, a eviction moratorium, which protected people from getting evicted, as long as, for non-payment of rent. That's what the protection was about. And so we also, push, I want to say, the governor and the powers that be to also put in place a utility disconnection moratorium. So there were some places like Wilson and Rocky Mount who owned their own utilities. So it was left up to those individual towns to determine if they wanted to, put a moratorium in place. Yeah. So we had to get the governor to make it apply to not just the Duke Powers and the big utility companies, but also to the small towns in Eastern North Carolina that control their own power. And
what were the challenges?
Well, of course, the challenges were, this whole empathy thing. How do we make this clear? How do we write and we're moving in a pandemic too. So I think Advanced Carolina, the whole organization, we shifted to how can we amplify these issues when we can't gather and we can't meet and we can't organize on the ground. So doing that virtual press conference and figuring that out, that was a challenge. Doing that was a challenge. And I think also challenging the concept that the people that we were advocating for were not just trying to take a rent holiday. I heard a lot of people telling me.
Hold on, we good? Y'all, okay. My bad. All right, we
good.
good.
I just heard a lot of people telling me stuff like, oh, they're not paying their rent because they think this is the rent holiday. Oh, they're not paying their utilities because they're using this as an opportunity to buy other things. So debunking that.
Because there was a lot of stuff, and even unfortunately, we laugh about it in our community. We see jokes like, yo, people not paying their rent so they can go get luxury cars or they can go get the newest J's. There's always been a running trope that if you're poor, it's because you automatically make poor decisions. And I think from this conversation, I'm beginning to unpack that it's not always the case. It's not like every poor person or every low-wage income earners walk around the mall with Jordan bags or whatever. You might see a couple, but hey, who are we? Why are we budgeting what they do? It's just that concept, and we always put it on, and it's us too at times.
Yeah.
And we put it on those, and that ain't funny no more.
It's not funny anymore, and that's the stereotype.
It never was funny, but I never was. But now I see it more. I'm like, I can't even laugh at stuff because that's not true. That's not a real narrative.
It's not a real narrative, and our executive director Marcus Bass loves to say, if social responsibility was a person, then why is a black woman who has 3 jobs, she should be the richest person in America. If you're looking at hard work, and you're trying to use hard work and being out there working as a determinant of success and responsibility, then someone with 3 jobs, they should be working 3 jobs, but the person with 3 jobs, they have to.
They should get rewarded.
There's no wealth on every job. But I'm just saying, a person working 3 jobs, to me, is the prime example of social responsibility and hard work. But then why are they still lacking? Okay, so we have to look beyond that, and we have to see that some of these issues are structural and systemic.
So now let's transition. This year in the fight ahead, right? And I think a lot of it is regards around budget. The budget, unpack. Don't we want to get into affordable housing, but for this sake, let's talk about the budget and unpack this, because many people don't know. I don't know personally what the North Carolina budget is, what budget and how it really affects me. So if you output when I say budget in the fight ahead, what that really is, and most importantly, how it affects us.
The budget is very important, and a lot of us are not financial, analysts or all of that. But let me tell you, just think about your own personal budget that you have at home, your budget over your bills, your budget over your expenses, and what you bring in. Those are your revenues. Well, the state has a budget, right? And, for years, the state has not created a new budget. And that budget has never done anything to equitably distribute the resources of the state. And those things have trickle down effect to your local budget. So like if you're living in Eastern North Carolina or a rural place, an urban city like Durham or Raleigh may get more money, let's talk about education.
Yep,
we all know that the Leandra case, or you may not know, think about your local schools. Think about the schools in your city. Think about which schools have shiny computers, which school has new books, and which schools still look like it did back in the 90s if you went to school back in the 90s. Just look at those contrasts and like whose schools are being more supported, whose schools are being more resourced, whose schools have certified teachers, all these things. And then you can just see the inequities in spending and allocation. So that's when you look at the budget. It's important to look at it on the state level because that has these trickle down effects, like I said, to your local budgets. But for just ordinary residents, I will encourage you just to start locally. Go to a city council meeting, when they talk about the budget. You might want to know like what nonprofits are being funded. Maybe you have a nonprofit that gives out food, that gives out coats, that gives out things for your community and services that your community or that you may have depended upon. Maybe they're not getting funded by your local county, but maybe some fancy nonprofit, I hate to say white-led nonprofit across town is getting all the money, you know. So I've been in discussions with local communities that would like to advocate to have some of those funds, redistributed to the nonprofits that help them or to the programs that they care about in the city. And, I've even had, young children, black, brown children say, well, we have nothing to do in our town. We're low wealth. We can't go with our family to the lake. On the weekend. We're usually here in town. We need basketball courts. Why is our recreational center looking like this? It hasn't been improved in years. So all those things matter around education, especially transportation too. Some of that's federal money, but like how's the city using some of that money it gets from the U.S. Department of Transportation to fund the local bus transportation system? Why aren't there bus hubs? In your community? Why are elderly people? I just see veterans and people in wheelchairs, the disabled pushing the disabled to get somewhere in town. And I'm just like, well, why won't they jump on the bus? And then I realized, the bus wasn't running in some of these towns. So all these things matter.
So as we close, what are some direct things that our viewers can do as far as ways they can help? Like what are some ways? One, to be like, so let's layer it. To get more informed. So what are some outlets that they can get more information on? Two, what are some people that have time? What can they do to volunteer? I know you don't know all the answers, but you can point us to certain places. And then three, people that don't have the time, they don't really want to get informed, but they got some money. Like from your purview, what are some organizations that they probably should look towards to kind of decide where they should put their dollars behind?
Well, I would say put your dollars behind organizations that you think are specifically helping, your community, the community that you grew up in, or the community where your families live in, or the communities that you're from. Of course, I have to tout Advance Carolina, North Carolina Black Alliance, donate to those organizations because these two organizations are really working hard, as we know, Greg, to really build up the capacity in underserved communities and Black communities. Think about, even voting, like, or what are some issues at your local, election district or poll office, or do they have supplies, COVID, is here, or do they have enough masks? Do they have enough, pens for everyone? All these things. And then just start locally. You can go to your city council meeting, get involved, but before you can really understand what the issues are, you probably have to show up at a city council meeting, or because of COVID, a lot of these meetings are being streamed on YouTube or live on some virtual format. Or you can probably go to your city council's website, pull up the minutes, read, see what's going on in your community. So that's how you can get this knowledge. You can, follow us on Facebook or social media platforms because we're always sharing information that's important to our community. And then you have to be able to connect these community concerns I talked about, housing, health, transportation, jobs, all of this to voting. So I cannot say enough about being able to vote. But all these things are related to who is your champion, who's championing your issue, who really cares about the things that affect your day-to-day life. Those are the people that you should be electing. And those are the people you should learn more information about. And as stated, we're always sharing that information, I know, on our social media platform.
And on that note, I do want to say, because even over the last couple of years, I used to always hear, go to your city council meeting. And then I used to always be like, man, what? Nah, man, bump that. We've been talking about that, blah, blah. But then I had to think about it, right? It used to just jump in my head, systematic. When you're trying to break a system, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be, they're not going to publish everything. They're not going to send, hey, Sydney, you know that black people are, no, you're never going to know. They want you to be on social media, living your life, doing your thing, and not be aware of your brothers and sisters doing that. They don't. So I'm like, no, you're going to have to go outside of your comfort zone and to look at the minutes. You can. Everybody has 5 or 10 minutes to scan them or something. If you really say you're about this community work, I see young people all the time get family, honor, legacy tatted. And I'm like, and no offense, and they're grown folk too. I'm like, but it doesn't correlate. I don't see that. So for those of you that really want to get off, I know sometimes you're like, well, they always talking about voting. They always talking about this. It's like, you can't give up the fight this easy.
You can't give up the fight this easy. And your vote does matter. I mean, they're after our vote. They're after our vote. That's why they show up in our community. That's why they're constantly trying to get us to register to vote. So your vote does matter. That's why you're always seeing someone asking you, are you registered to vote? Because it does matter. And it has made a difference, we know, in the, most recent, big election. But what I would say is that when you go to your city council meeting, yes, it's ineffective if it's just one person going. The type of lawyering work I do is in support of coalitions. But what I've seen is that, the same way you can talk about, whether or not the Cowboys, the Steelers, or whoever your football team is, the way you can talk about those issues, where you can talk about your hair, your nails, or these other talks, start talking about just what's impacting you. A lot of times we don't share our concerns because we want to pretend that, things are not impacting us, but you'll be amazed if you just open up and just share, maybe a social issue that's impacting your family that, your neighbor will say, yeah, you know what, that's impacting me too. So join your concern to your neighbor concern and, just be involved. I mean, because affluent communities do it all the time, I'm telling you.
They rally in the school board. They gonna rally. They all come deep in that thing.
They do it all the time. That's how
you served him nuts on his cupcakes. It was on his thing. I need you fired. Seriously, they be like, I put in this allergy report and you did it. They on fire.
They do.
Boy, our babies come back sick, beat up, whatever. You shouldn't have did that. Go apologize to that white teacher. Why you apologize to that white teacher?
Yeah.
No, she shouldn't have said that. I don't you feel me?
You know why? Because they go collectively together. They make their issues large. Call them Karens, call them whatever you want to call them. They're making it large issues. And they know what power is. Power is the ability to define your reality and the reality of others. Ooh. So they are talking about these issues because they want to define their lives. They want to maintain their lives, okay? But they're also trying to define your lives too, because in order to maintain their lives, they have to make sure you stay where you are too. So I'm telling you, this is really deep. It's insidious. And when you really look at it, you're just like, wow, this is a system that's there's a puppet master that's pulling the system, right? And in order for some people to have, they have to keep some people in the have-not category, right? So, education is power. And on the spiritual tip, again, Bible says, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. So we got to be awoken to many things, more than music, more than clothes, more than fast, more than TikToks. We need to be awakened to what's basically destroying our communities and the legacies that we want to pass to our children, too. We don't want our children to inherit poverty. We want our children to inherit success and wealth. But this country was started where one group of people were able to pass wealth to their children, and another group of people all they were able to pass was poverty. And we can't think just because Jim Crow got dismantled that the long-lasting effects of Jim Crow still don't impact our communities today. So I've never celebrated Kwanzaa before, but this past season, I started looking at the principles of Kwanzaa, and I was like, wow, that's really deep. It is about, bettering our community. It's about unity. It's about doing this together. It's about getting back to the basis of we're a village, and it takes a village to raise a child.
Man, you said
we're
a lot.
Stronger together. I know it's cliche, but the truth of the matter is we are stronger together.
So on that note, I want to say, unpacking that, our challenge to you as a viewer, sometime this year, grab you and a couple of your friends. If you're in a church, grab your church fam. Grab them all if you can. I know it might be in the Zoom room, but if it's in person, bring them too. Make sure you, I please attend one city council meeting. If it's virtually, whatever, but don't go alone. If you go alone, you're going to be like, why am I here? But when you with other people, they going to hear stuff like, oh, you hear what she said about the schooling? Oh, my aunt was affected by this and whatever. So go with whoever, try to be 5 or more, your friends, whatever, and do that. And like I said, encourage yourself to, while y'all talking about basketball, while y'all talking about football, while you talking about nails, housewives, we're not saying don't talk about it, right? But encourage yourself to ask conversations about, even if it's not affecting you, yo, it's affecting something. We Black, it's somebody in our family. Is affecting something. So have that dialogue and be there for your people. And most importantly, check into the next episode of Advance Notice. And I want to say this. Thank you so much for your time, your presence, your energy. It felt it. It was real. And if this is where it's going to be this all season, I'm excited to be here. So I appreciate you, Sister Taylor.
You're welcome.
And there it is, your Advance Notice.